If the law was only meant to keep us holy until Jesus' death and resurrection, and we don't need to keep it anymore because Jesus fulfilled it, then what about the laws against eating blood in Leviticus 17, verse 10 to 16? What about unlawful sexual relations in Leviticus 18? What about chapter 19, which tells us to love our neighbor as ourself? Jesus surely fulfilled this, so we shouldn't need to keep it anymore, right? What about the laws that condemn child sacrifice in Leviticus chapter 20? What about the laws for showing kindness to the poor in Leviticus 25, verses 35 to 43? What about showing kindness to our enemies in Exodus 23, 4 to 5? What about leaving the gleanings of our harvest for the poor in Leviticus 23, verse 22? What about keeping the Sabbath day holy, which is one of the 10 Commandments? What about Deuteronomy 24, verse 5, which says that when a man is newly married, he is not to go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty, but rather he is to be free to stay at home 1 year to be happy with his wife? I know, 1 year with your wife? Obviously, Jesus freed us from such a command. What about Deuteronomy 23, 15 to 16, which says that when a slave escapes from his master to you, you are not to return him, but let him stay with you? This should speak volumes of what slavery looked like among Israel. They were treated well. They were set free every 7 years, and if a slave wanted to stay with his master, do you hear that? Wanted to stay, then the master of that slave would pierce the slave's ear with an anvil, and he would belong to him forever. Did you know that keeping God's commands is God's mark upon us? According to Exodus 13, verse 9, they are to be sign on our hands and our foreheads, between our eyes, the very 2 places that the beast also puts his mark on his followers. Which mark do you have? The mark of God, of keeping his commands and his will? Or do you reject them, thus choosing the mark of the beast instead? There is no middle ground. We cannot pick and choose which commands we want to follow. As the Bible states, if you break one commandment, you break all of them. As you can see, God's law is not a burden at all, but rather it is for our own good. It is a blessing, and God commands us to keep it. God is a king, and governance as a kingdom is put forth in commands. If you do away with the commands, you do away with the king.